So, sir, if I could get you to go ahead and introduce yourself.
I'm Frank Neal Blanton Jr. I'm the current mayor of Graham and have been mayor for, will be 4 years coming up next May. So.
Okay. Where do you have a job when you're not mayor?
No, I'm retired. I retired in 2008 from Encore Electric Delivery, and then I spent 10 years with the city and the Economic Development Corporation as economic development director, and that's when I decided to run for mayor. Was in 2018, I guess, or about that. Yeah.
Okay. Your family, did you kind of follow in your family's footsteps, or did you branch off as opposed to what your parents did for
No, I was born in Little Rock, Arkansas, and then about 6 months after that, we moved to Dallas, and that's where I grew up. My mother was a housewife, in-house housewife, and my dad was a traveling salesman. So when I graduated from high school and went off to Texas Tech, I really didn't know what I wanted to do. And then I had a friend that went to work for the electric company, and I got married right out of college, and so we moved to Irving, and that's where I started with the electric company.
You said that you were born in Arkansas. When did you move to Texas and specifically Young County?
It was, we moved to Dallas probably 6 months after I was born, really soon. I was transferred with the electric company around various spots, Lufkin, Bedford, Euless, Wichita Falls, and everything like that. And I think we settled in Graham around 1986, maybe 87, something like that. My wife was a teacher, and she began teaching here in Graham at that time.
Do you have any children?
I do. I've got an older daughter that lives in Ohio that has a son there, and then my son Chris and his wife Emery live here, and we have two grandchildren. They have two children, so we're lucky that they're around and we get to spend time with them.
Well, that's great. Well, in talking about COVID, to kind of get a frame of reference, can you tell us what the worst illness is that you've ever had?
I had pneumonia when we were visiting family in Little Rock, and when I was about 6 or 7, and I developed pneumonia and spent probably a week or 2 weeks in the hospital with pneumonia when I was real young, and that's probably the worst illness that I've ever had to deal with.
Okay. As far as epidemic like illnesses, can you remember any of those? And
I remember getting the polio vaccine and smallpox vaccine and all of that. I had an aunt that developed polio and was confined. The first thing that I remember was she was in one of those iron lung type deals. And afterwards, she got out of that, but she was paralyzed from the waist down. So that was the first experience that I had with any kind of pandemic or any type of really serious illness, was that I had an aunt that had polio and was paralyzed from it.
Well, I'm sure that you probably got the smallpox vaccination.
Yes.
And the polio vaccination.
Yes.
Do you remember?
I remember the doing the pinch on the arm, and then I think it was the polio vaccine that they gave you with a lump of sugar. It seems like.
Yes.
It seems like I remember, and so yeah, I vividly remember those things.
Okay. Have you ever been a caregiver for anyone?
My mother lived into her mid-90s, and in her early 90s, she developed Alzheimer's. And so my sister and I kind of took turns taking care of her, and eventually we had to put her in a nursing home and everything. But that's really the closest thing probably that I've ever had to a caregiver, type situation.
Yes, sir. Specifically on COVID-19, when did you first hear about COVID-19?
It was such a strange time. There's a group that goes down to the high school basketball tournament every year. And so we went down in 19, I guess it was. And so we got down there, and we were about to go to the first session, and something came up, and we didn't go to the session and whatever. And then we got a text that said that they had canceled the rest of the sessions, and we were in San Antonio, and that's when we were really first aware of what COVID had started to develop and what was going on with it. So. Yeah, that was our first recollection, or that was my first recollection of when COVID really came out.
Okay, and that was in 2019, probably.
2019 in March.
March.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Right. I mean, really, right when it began.
After that, where did you get most of your information about COVID-19?
When I got back to Graham, and we started seeing it developed, we got together with our partners, which is the county and the hospital and Dr. Martin and the county health, and sat down and talked about what we needed, what we knew at that time about COVID, what were the procedures that we really needed to look at. That was kind of early. I don't know that the governor had done anything at that point, but we kind of started at that point to get together and talk about it.
Where did y'all get the information that you had on it at the time?
A lot of it came from the hospital, and a lot of it came off from the CDC and what they were looking at and what they were seeing as COVID developed. So we picked up a lot of that information. A lot of it came from the Texas Health Department as well, and what we were getting from them as far as what might be the protocols that you all need to start looking at.
At what point did it become a concern for you personally, and then for you as mayor?
When those numbers started, when the hospital started keeping numbers, and we started seeing those numbers rise, and Dr. Martin was really good about kind of leading us in when we should really start being concerned. And I kind of remember we started doing FaceTime meetings for the public with Dr. Martin and the Judge Bullock and I and everything. And I think that was probably early on. That was the first time, which probably would have been the middle of the summer, maybe in 19, Tony, when we first really thought that we had a serious situation here and we needed to start looking at how we were going to address it.
What steps did you initially take to protect yourself, and then the steps that you took as mayor to protect the community?
Well, I think what we did was personally is, started wearing masks. We isolated ourselves, quite a bit. We didn't take a daily trip to the grocery store or to Walmart or any of those other people. So personally, that's kind of where we started with it. On a wider scope, we started looking at what we needed to do, what recommendations we needed to make to the public as far as wearing masks in public, the fact that you needed to isolate. About that time is when I think the governor came out and, shut a lot of the businesses down and said, we don't need to reopen these until we get a better feeling of where we're going and what we're doing. So, we followed a lot of what the governor's guidelines were and what he thought, the direction that the Texas Health Department said we needed to go.
You were in a position that you had to make decisions that would affect the safety of others. Can you describe what it feels like to be in that position and how it affected you and the decisions you made? I would never have thought that when I was elected that we would face this type of challenge in our community. And so it's really, you really need to think about the community and what's best for the community and how you get that word out. And it sets heavy on your chest, I think, Tony, when you talk about the responsibility that you have
the community and the employees that you have with the city and how you protect them and what you do to try and do that. So it's a heavy burden. It really is.
Do you feel like the community responded well to the request that you, as the city of Graham and the county, made?
I think we did okay. I honestly, I wish that there probably would have been a little more compliance with face masks. Early on, we might have been able to reduce the numbers of, because we had a couple of spikes in there, that got us up above 100 a few times, and so. But overall, I think that the community did as good a job as they could.
You mentioned earlier some of the steps that you had taken. Can you be a little more specific about what steps the city requested the community to do?
Well, we first of all, the judge and I looked at the recommendation from the state, and basically, we were a lot of the businesses were shut down. Those that were considered non-essential, and places like United, was an essential business, was established as an essential business. Walmart, some of the filling stations, I think, things like that. But what we did is then, once we issued those orders, then we looked back and saw, okay, what do we need to do from a standpoint of internally with the city? We had just moved City Hall over there, and so we were fortunate that when we moved City Hall over there, that we created a barrier, a glass barrier between the public and the people behind that were taking payments for water payments. So we were fortunate that we could still operate with people coming in wearing masks. We shut the city down for a period of time, and then slowly opened it back up, and all our employees were wearing masks, and so I think we approached it about as good as we could.
Were all the steps taken at once, or were they implemented in phases?
I think we kind of moved into it. The mask phase was really the first and probably the most important thing that we had. Separating people out, not having them congregate in groups, kind of followed a little bit later on. But we kind of jumped into it, as soon as we got the word that, this is really important, and, you need to think about mask wearing and separation of people and everything like that.
Were these steps taken as directives from the state level, or were these that y'all put in place because you thought were best?
Most of them were directed from the state level, and the judge, had a certain responsibility from the county standpoint, but we took most of our direction from the Texas Health Department and implemented those things that they recommended.
With the knowledge that you have now and the ability to look back on everything that was done, do you feel like all of those procedures that were implemented were successful?
I think they probably were. I think maybe we might have thought that we should have maybe jumped on it a little sooner. I mean, the national perspective was that this wasn't that big of a deal, and I think that obviously it turned into a really big deal, and I think had we been a little more adamant, but at the same time you have to take into consideration that rural America is a lot different than urban America, and they look at things differently in rural America. So you have to take that into consideration when you're trying to implement procedures.
I understand, and as we learned more information and we were told different things about the disease, did that affect any of the procedures that you implemented?
Well, I think that when we learned how the disease was communicated to other individuals. I think then we started realizing, well, we need to start cleaning countertops when somebody comes in, and we need to make sure that break room type stuff is cleaned and sanitized in a way. So I think we learned as time goes on that that the way the disease was communicated, that we had to do some extra steps, I think, that we probably would not have done ordinarily.
How did your routine change as mayor, and how did your routine change as a civilian?
You know, of course, I think as a civilian, I was accustomed to coming into City Hall on a regular basis, daily, maybe every other day. And so when the quarantine basically started, I wasn't able to do that, and we canceled a few council meetings. We had council meetings that were just online, that we could put online out there, and separated all the council members out, and wore masks and everything like that. But at home, more than anything else, personally, it was just being at home and being away from exposure to really everything.
Did you ever come down with COVID-19?
Yes.
Do you know how you got it?
I really don't. And I can't remember exactly when it was, but my wife was going up to see my daughter in Ohio, and so I took her to the airport on like a Thursday or Friday and dropped her off, and then I came home. Well, that Sunday she called and said, I really don't feel very well. So she went in, she tested positive for it, and to the extent that they put her in the hospital. Okay. And then probably a day later, I started feeling bad, and I went in and tested, and they said, yeah, you're positive. My episode with it was pretty good. I was sick, a couple of days, but after that, I kind of, I got over it to the extent that I could, or whatever. Her experience was not good at all. She spent 2 different stays in the hospital and 2 weeks up there in Ohio before she could come home. And then she was what they, I think, designated as a long hauler. She had problems for quite a while after that, with being tired all the time, and everything like that. So her situation was quite a bit worse than mine was.
Did that change your opinion about the severity of the virus?
Yeah, it really did. I was lucky, but it really concerned me that I wasn't up there with her, and that she was, with my daughter, and in the end, my daughter contracted it because she had been around my wife and everything. Luckily, my grandson, they don't know if he ever had it or not. He's 9 or 10, so they never tested him. But yeah, it was a concern. It was a real concern for me.
Were you acquainted with anyone that died from COVID-19?
Yes, there are some people that I was aware of, and that I knew, and had. Yeah, there were some people that passed away because of the COVID.
When the government came out and asked everyone to quarantine for 14 days, did you participate? Did you agree?
Yeah, we did. We sure did. We had stocked up, I think, before that, and most of our friends here in town quarantined as well. So it was a difficult time.
I was going to ask you, how did you adjust to the daily routine of being quarantined for 14 days?
Well, and it's tough, but you read a lot, you watch a lot of television, it's tough when you're used to getting up and going and doing things and everything like that. But we adjusted pretty well. We really did.
Good. Has your daily life activities changed, or or are you back to where you were before?
Oh, I think we're back to where we were before, but I think our lives will be forever changed by this and the impact that it's had on our community and our nation, and what how things will change and how we'll look at things as we go forward. Yeah, I think it's had a huge impact on our lives.
As mayor, did the quarantine, COVID, all of that wrapped up together, did that have an economic impact on the city?
It did, and I will be the first one to tell you that I have not necessarily talked to individual businesses, but I know that it had an impact on it. But in the end, people became very creative in how they took care of their businesses, how the restaurants delivered and had pickup and things like that, and everything. So I think in the end we came out absolutely as best that we could. What's really amazing is that we look at sales tax every month, and over the last 2 years, our sales tax has slowly, it has gone up continually, and we've had an incline in our sales tax over the last 2 years, which is sometimes hard to explain, but we're very fortunate.
Did any city employees have to be furloughed or laid off because of the economic impact?
We did not. We were fortunate that we did not have to lay off anybody and furlough anybody.
So, since you're retired, do you know if any of the businesses that you had been acquainted with, or any of the people you know, file for the PPP loans through the government?
Yeah, no, I think a number of the businesses that operated within the community and outside the community filed for those benefits, and I think were very helpful in some cases.
The stimulus money provided by the federal government, was that helpful with your personal expenses, or did it end up just being extra money?
It kind of ended up being extra money that we put back and donated some of it to some organizations that probably needed a little help, since that time was that it was difficult for them to raise money. So,
do you think the federal government might have been a little too quick to hand out that stimulus money?
I don't know. That's a really tough question. I'm a pretty conservative person, and so I worry about spending trillions and trillions of dollars. It's going to come back at some point in time, and inflation or something, it seems like. And I'm not an economist, or I'm not a financial person, but that you got to pay the piper at some point in time.
Yes, sir. Did you come up with any hobbies or interests while you were quarantined or home?
No, I started. There were various games on my laptop that I kind of got into and kind of got hooked on for a period of time, but nothing of any. I should have gotten into more reading and more scholarly type activities, but I didn't. So.
Did you wear masks as they requested when they?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah, absolutely. Really everywhere that we went, that after the quarantine, when we would get out and have go to Walmart or go to the grocery store, yeah, I always had a mask on.
Did the COVID-19 virus impact you emotionally? Did it cause you any depression? Were you upset about some of the effects it had on people?
No, really, from a personal standpoint, I didn't go through that. I mean, I was concerned about individuals and people that I knew that that had gotten it and how they responded to it, and some of them were pretty sick, and some of them weren't as sick. But I think, like, anybody with friends, you worry about your friends and how they're going to get along.
How would you say you spent the majority of your time while you were in quarantine?
I spent a lot of time watching the news channels and trying to stay up on what the CDC is saying, and what the federal government is saying, and what the Surgeon General was saying, and what the Texas Health Department was saying, and what the governor was saying. So I spent a lot of time watching the news channels, trying to figure out where we were and where we were headed.
Have you gotten the vaccine?
I have, and when the vaccine first came out, I think everybody kind of, okay, when are they? The first vaccine came here, and I think, it went to the doctors and nurses, which it should have. And then I got a call from somebody and said, well, they're giving vaccines in Seymour, the Pfizer vaccine in Seymour. So I called over there, and they said, yeah, you can set up a time. So we set up a time and went over there and got our first vaccination. And then 6 weeks later, I guess, we got our second vaccination over there as well. Yeah.
Were you leery about the science behind the vaccinations?
I wasn't. Maybe I'm dumb and stupid. I don't know, but I just thought that what was going, what the benefits of it were going to outweigh any of the risk, and we got a little, for a day we were a little, nauseated and sick or whatever, but we got over it and have not had any effects whatsoever. And and I really have a hard time with people that, especially at this time when we're this far into it, that haven't gotten vaccinated. I think it's imperative that you do that.
Were you nauseated after the first shot, the second
Yeah,
shot,
no,
or both shots?
no, both. Really both shots. We were kind of a little sick for a day's period of time, but it just lasted a day.
What do you think is the most important lessons that you learned from your experience living through this pandemic?
That you need to listen to the experts, and that you need to follow their guidelines and their procedures to keep it from getting worse. I think had we done that as a nation in the beginning, we wouldn't have seen 500,000 people die. At least I hope we wouldn't. But that's what I learned, I think, is that, you need to take it serious. And even if it's not the pandemic that we just went through, you just don't know. You never know what the conditions. And with the way the variants have developed, and right now we're going through another big spike in the nation because of the Delta variant. You need to take these things serious.
Would you approach any of this differently if it happened again, knowing what you know now? And that's information you didn't have when you were first having to make those decisions.
That's a really tough question, because I think that as a city official, you have limits over what you can really do and what you can recommend and what you can enforce. And so I don't know that I would have. I really don't know that we could have changed anything. I think that we were as forceful, especially in our FaceTime meetings, as we could be about wearing masks, washing your hands, isolating yourself, from other people, until we find a vaccine and everything like that. So those are the things that we did, and I don't know that we could have done very much more, Tony, honestly.
And we always have the benefit of hindsight to make those decisions from.
Yeah.
Do you feel that the risk is over?
I do not. I think until we reach that 70 or 75% vaccination level in the nation, that there's going to be a risk out there, and I think we're seeing it with people that have been vaccinated and are still, getting sick to some extent. Not as drastic as the people that were on ventilators and things like that, but no, I do, and I'm concerned a lot about our children and where they're going to be in this whole process, especially those under 12 years old.
Do you think we're prepared? Should we have another pandemic or an epidemic?
I think we're better prepared than we were. I don't think that you can ever prepare for such a drastic change in the life of us. I mean, it's just so drastic. And they interviewed some people that went through the flu epidemic in the early 1900s, and how that developed and expanded and everything like that. I found that interesting, so I don't know if we're ever prepared for that type of situation. Hopefully, we're better prepared now than we ever have been.
Do you feel other generations can learn from our experiences through recorded history? And how do you think that would compare to written accounts?
I don't know how it compare written accounts, but I definitely think that the younger generation hopefully will look at it and see that they need to take these things serious, and that it can have a profound effect on them as they get older, and where they need to be in terms of compliance with those things that keep it from happening again. Yeah.
Do you have any other thoughts or points that you think need to be made that I didn't ask you about?
Once again, I go back to the fact that rural America is a lot different than Dallas and Fort Worth or Houston or New York and some of those other places, and they have a different mindset, I think, in terms of independence and what they need to do and everything like that. So, if I was going back and looking at it, from a 5,000-foot level, I think that we as a rural community need to step up and be more active in participating with helping the government decide, having input into the decisions that they make and how they reflect on the communities that they serve. Because a lot of the decisions I think that are made are based on the Dallas and Fort Worth and the Houstons and the San Antonios and everything like that. And you really need you need somebody up there who is defending the rural community and how they look at it and what is in their best interest as well. So.
Well, sir, we thank you for giving us this opportunity to get your perspective on this, and we want to thank you for your service.
Well, I appreciate that, and we are so blessed here in Graham, Texas, because of the community that we have, the people that serve in this community, the people that want to make it a better community, all across the board, and so we're very fortunate. And I've lived in a lot of different communities, and I've told people this over and over again. Graham is unique in so many ways, and it's where I decided to stay and raise my family and everything like that, and that's why my son came back, and his wife, who grew up here as well, wanted to come back and raise their kids here because it's good as there is. So.
Okay.
All right.
Thank you, sir.
Well, thank